Welcome to Lethal Dose, your favorite toxicology-focused podcast where we delve into true crime cases involving drugs and poisons. My name is Venus Dineko. I'm a layperson fascinated by true crime.
My name is Kayla Woods. I'm an author and toxicologist.
Let's get started.
Happy Valentine's Day. We love all of you listeners.
This is for everybody.
We're so happy to be back with our Season 7 premiere.
Season 7.
Today, we are talking about Spanish fly.
So I told my partner, well, he asked what we were talking about for this episode, and I said, Spanish fly, I'm so excited about this one. And he said, what the fuck is Spanish fly? And I said, I'm pretty sure it's gas station Viagra. Like, that is how I understand it. Is that kind of what it, like, that's what it is, right? It's boner pills. No. Yes and no?
Well, yes and no. Yes, I like that answer. Yes and no. Yeah, it's a little complicated, but yes, it is an aphrodisiac, so it is boner pills, but
not boner pills in the way that it, like, gives you blood flow to your member.
No, it doesn't do that, but we'll talk about it. We'll talk about all the nitty-gritty details.
Excellent.
So, do you, and I'm not meaning to, like, delve into your, like, personal life, but do you ever do anything for Valentine's Day? Like, what does the day kind of look like?
No, we don't.
Because it's stupid, right?
We really, like, so when my partner and I were first together, we both worked at the same restaurant together, so we never had really Valentine's Day off. We always worked Valentine's Day. So actually, Valentine's Day was kind of like hell on earth for us because it's such a big day for restaurants.
Well, and you worked at a sushi restaurant.
We worked at a sushi restaurant, and it was like the nicest restaurant in town, and so like it was a BFD to go to Momo for sushi on Valentine's Day. Yeah. So it was kind of a hellish day for us, so we didn't really do anything, and that's kind of just carried over. It's just kind of another day, and yeah.
I think.
What about you guys?
I mean, sometimes we'll do something like, you know, I mean, the first year we were together, we were in high school. And so he, like, was one of those.
It was a big deal.
It was a big deal. He brought me flowers and a teddy bear, which I still have, actually. I still have that teddy bear.
Oh.
But after, like, 16 years of Valentine's Day, it's just, like, it's kind of a weird commercial day. And,
that's how we feel. Like, the first, and, like, now that you mention it, the first Valentine's Day, he got me a guitar. He got me a guitar because I was taking guitar. And it was like the sweetest thing because I was taking guitar lessons at the time, and he got me a guitar, and I still have that guitar. But like ever since, like, yeah. So that first one counts, fellas and ladies and thems.
And if you're dating, like I bet it counts.
The dating, like when you're dating, like do not listen to us. Like it matters.
Yeah, like
it kind of matters.
I am all
but
for
like you
finding...
said, 10 years, 16 years into it.
Yeah. But I'm all for finding, like, joy wherever it is to be had. So if, like, Valentine's Day brings you joy, very cool, right?
And if that's the time that you get, like, they're spicy. You, like, make things extra spicy. So is that, like, is that what people are doing with the Spanish fly? Is, like, getting things spicy?
They used to. So I went and I found what Cosmo is recommending for aphrodisiacs in this day and age.
Okay.
They recommend 12 different foods, primarily foods.
Okay.
They say truffle mushrooms, maca, ginseng, saffron, avocados, dark chocolate, oysters, walnuts, almonds, honey, strawberries, and figs.
Okay. That all sounds delicious.
Yeah, it sounds good. It sounds kind of expensive, you know, like the truffle mushrooms and oysters. Like that sounds like a pretty nice dinner.
Yes.
And, you know, some of these have been used since antiquity for the purposes of increasing libido, if only for their shape and relationship to the origin stories of the gods. So figs, they're like, it looks kind of like a vulva. And it's like, I guess, sure.
Maybe more like balls.
Balls.
No, they look more like balls than a vulva.
All the pictures I saw, they were cut in half and looking on the inside.
Yes,
but
okay. But if it's just a fig, Like, if it's a fix, if it's two-faced, like,
yes, accurate, but nobody was talking about that part. But then Aphrodite, for which aphrodisiacs are named, goddess of love.
Makes so much sense. It makes so much sense when you
Doesn't
say
it?
it like that, yeah.
She came from the sea, and so wouldn't everything from the sea,
be
like oysters, lobsters, mussels, scallops, wouldn't they all encourage love? So wouldn't they have? Yeah. Everything on their list is pretty benign. There's nothing on their list and I'm like, ooh, I don't know about that, except saffron. How much saffron are you going to have to eat to get an aphrodisiac effect?
Yeah, because
curious?
Saffron, you usually just use like a few threads, right? Like,
yeah,
you don't need a lot.
I'm not made of fucking money either. That's
right. I know. When we got saffron in like one of our Blue Apron meals, we were like, oh my God, we're so fucking fancy.
So fancy.
So fancy.
So most of them are safe and commonplace, and most of the recommendations throughout history have been safe and commonplace, because if you're going to reproduce, you want to live through the act, right?
Sure.
But not all of them have this history. Enter Spanish fly. So, Spanish fly has origins neither in Spain or with flies.
Okay.
It comes from shiny emerald green blister beetles, which have been used in medicine for over 2,000 years and are commonly found in the Mediterranean.
Oh, okay.
So Hippocrates recommended these ground blister beetles for edema. Practitioners in China and Africa used the ground beetles mixed into a solvent for treatment of indigestion. And this treatment makes sense because blister beetles contain a chemical called cantharidin, which is highly irritating to lipids, such as those in the skin and the GI tract. So the beetles release cantharidin from their back legs as a defense mechanism, and when they crawl across your skin, usually they're pretty agitated that they're on some sort of predator, and so it causes blisters that give the beetles their names.
Okay.
Grinding these beetles up and eating them makes the cantharidin irritate the GI tract, in some cases so severely that it strips away the stomach lining.
But we're using this for medicine. We were.
For what?
For what, though?
For indigestion. Just drink some up and it'll cure your indigestion. And
because you're gonna shit out your stomach lining?
Basically.
Okay, just making sure I'm on the right track.
Yeah, you oldie medicine.
Right.
And in the body's attempt to eliminate the cantharidin, it can cause swelling in the urinary tract because it's primarily excreted through the kidneys and the urine. Eating 2 or 3 beetles is enough to kill a person, and they're not very large beetles at all. I'll put pictures up on social media. They're not very big. There's an estimated lethal dose of 10 to 80 milligrams flat. Not milligrams per kilogram, but milligrams flat.
Oh, so like it doesn't matter your body weight is what you're saying. Like this is the stuff. Okay.
Yeah. But as some French soldiers in Nigeria found in the 1800s, even eating an animal which has eaten the beetle is enough to poison yourself just a little bit.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of one of those, like, the big fish eating the littler fish. Like,
yes.
It reminds me of that. That's crazy.
So the soldiers were eating frogs, which had eaten the beetles. And they presented to their army physician with stomach pains, nausea, dry mouth, weakness, and persistent erections, which some of our male listeners can attest is not always a sign of actual arousal, and sometimes you just get a weird boner because your urinary tract is inflamed. And so, as I was saying earlier, it is kind of like Viagra in that it artificially simulates arousal. But it's not sending blood there. It's just literally irritating it. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
And this inflammation can actually worsen into tubular necrosis, although the GI effects are the usual cause of death. Cantharidin irritates the face, mouth, and the entirety of the GI tract because all of those have highly lipid cells, and it can actually cause erosion of the mouth, the tongue, throat, duodenum, and stomach, and can cause fatal GI hemorrhage.
Oh, that doesn't sound like a good time at all.
It is a nasty, nasty poison. Patients who have lived long enough for their bodies to attempt to eliminate large amounts of cantharidin have experienced pissing blood, bladder hemorrhaging, and engorgement of the vessels in the pelvis, and also ovarian engorgement. Seizures are also possible up to 36 hours after ingestion, but this isn't very common. One of the oldest cases of Spanish fly administration resulting in death after exposure as a supposed aphrodisiac was in 1772, when Marquis de Sade poisoned several sex workers at a brothel with laced-in anise pastilles. At least 2 women died as a direct result of the poison, but it is reported that many of them threw themselves out the window to end their agony.
Holy shit. So I thought that Spanish fly was used, like, I don't know why, like, I just always imagined it was, like, for men. Like,
it typically is, like, advertised,
right,
air quotes, towards men.
Sure.
Yeah, it's in a lot of, like, old, like, nudie magazines that they'll advertise Spanish fly to men. And I think it is because it primarily irritates the urethra, and so that's a thing that you primarily see in men. And you don't see that as much in women. But people were like, if it causes arousal, again, big air quotes, in men, it must also do the same in women. Not really realizing that it's just the simulated thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
In 1936, some young men were apparently looking to start an orgy in a Slovakian village when they offered Spanish fly-contaminated chocolates to guests at a dance. They'd even gone so far as to rent a large room next to the ballroom where the dance was taking place. But instead of experiencing a night of hedonistic revelry, 25 people were poisoned. Cantharidin exposure has also caused death in less salacious cases. In 1896, doctors reported the death of a patient who was recovering from oral cantharidin exposure for whatever reason. And then he decided to apply the blister powder dermally to his neck to cure a headache.
That reminds me of that head on. Do you know what I'm talking about? Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
Apply directly to the forehead.
Apply directly to the forehead. That's what that reminds me of. Like, I have a headache. Let me put this powder on my neck.
It must have been, this guy seems like he was a little bit obsessed with this blister beetle thing. Put it, he ate some of it, wasn't doing well, and then was like, let me just use more.
Sure.
He ended up experiencing seizures and died only a few hours after this dermal exposure. In 1953, a fisherman obtained cantharidin from a chemist to use as bait and was told to add it to a bottle of water and then soak the bait in the water. He got some of this solution on his thumb, kind of probably shaking the bottle, and then later pricked his thumb with a hook and put it in his mouth to stop the bleeding. This small, almost incidental exposure was enough to result in his death, as the concentration of the solution was very high.
Wow.
Yeah. We're dealing with a very, very, very potent poison here.
Like almost like the word that comes to mind is volatile. Like,
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the 1950s, crushed up blister beetles were still being used legitimately for treating warts and water warts. And it's actually still used for that today. There was an FDA approval on a drug that's like this just last year, and it's the only approval that we now in 2024 have.
Okay.
But so in the 1950s, it could be found in the chemist shops of the United Kingdom. But they were Schedule I poisons. According to the 1933 Pharmacy and Poisons Act, you had to sign the register if you got them. And they were supposed to be administered under a doctor's supervision in order to avoid accidental poisoning. They took this very seriously by the 1950s. So, in 1954, cantharidin once again made headlines, this time as the poison in a manslaughter case where the perpetrator was someone with perhaps the greatest access to the poison and the least understanding of how it worked, because he was the office manager for a pharmacy.
So he had the keys to the kingdom, but no idea how to rule it. Yeah. Got it.
So Arthur Kendrick Ford was 44 years old and had worked at the chemist shop at Euston Road for some 30 years, except for his time deployed with the Royal Army Service Corps during World War II. During his time in Singapore, he had learned about Spanish fly, but he was a married man who had no need for such tricks in the bedroom. He returned home in 1946 and thought nothing more of it, until he became obsessed with one of the typists in the office, 27-year-old Betty Grant. I really like the book that I got describing this case, Poisoner in the Dock by John Rowland. Most sources on the case have been lost to time or are behind paywalls that I can't breach. So it's the only available account nowadays as well, which is unfortunate. I was able to find some stuff in the British Medical Journal that backed everything up, but it sucks to get anything from one point of view.
Sure.
Rowland has some really good insights about poison and crimes, but he has very of-the-time notions about office fraternizing that makes it sound like he thinks it's inevitable that Ford's attentions would wander to this young woman, right?
Like, of course he's going to go for the secretary. Like,
Right.
Of course.
course.
Why would he not?
It just happens. It's an office.
It's an office. Of course she's going to get her ass grabs a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So according to Ford, Grant grew fond of Ford. But, again, who's to say? He's basically her boss and he's twice her age. And he also admits that Grant kept putting him off when he tried to persuade her into what I can only assume was just going to be screwing around at work. Like, he probably wasn't planning to have this leave the office in any capacity. And then he calls her a prude for not giving in to his advances.
Because of course.
Because
it's the 1950s, so.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Grant suspected nothing when Ford came into work around 2:30 on April 26, 1954, with a bag of coconut ice and offered her some. And do you know what coconut ice is? Because I didn't.
I don't.
So it's a confection of icing sugar, condensed milk, and desiccated coconut. And it usually is served in 2 layers. One is white and one is pink. And so it's this little 2-layered square of coconut.
Okay.
And no one really thought anything about him bringing this coconut ice into the office, actually. He didn't hand the bag around, but he did pick out pieces by hand one at a time and offer it to people, which, again, not totally unusual because you don't want everyone putting their hand in the bag.
Right, like one for you, one for you.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. The bag had a label from a nearby store, and Ford came by with it after lunch, so everything seems totally above board and normal. He offered some pieces to some of the other women in the office, including a Miss Glover and a Miss Dodds, and he also ate a piece himself. It is unclear whether he also offered some to 19-year-old June Mullins or if she found the bag lying in the open and took some for herself. Is it possible he only offered it to certain women? Yes, of course, that's a possibility because he seems gross. Is it possible he only offered it to women around Miss Grant to not seem suspicious? I have no idea what the layout of the office was. But I will point out that it's not weird that we're only mentioning misses here because there were only 4 men in this office of 26 people. So it's primarily women.
Gotcha.
So 10 or 15 minutes after this coconut ice is given out, Mullins and Grant began experiencing stomach aches and nausea. Mullins was given some baking soda and water, but her pain only worsened after drinking it, and she felt an excruciating burning sensation in her mouth and throat, which made it difficult to speak and swallow. Soon, both women were vomiting and were taken upstairs to a sick room in the office used specifically for if someone started to feel sick at work. Mullins continued to worsen and was admitted to University College Hospital at 5 p.m. Grant called a taxi to take her home, but the sickness had already progressed for several hours at this point, and she didn't reach home until 6. She vomited multiple times in the taxi and was on the verge of passing out when she finally did get home. Grant's doctor made a house call to treat her around 7:15 and immediately ordered for her to be admitted to St. James Hospital because she was vomiting blood. She didn't reach the hospital until 9:30 and was still vomiting pure blood at this point. Yeah. Her stomach was pumped and she was given morphine, which did improve her condition. Mullins had diarrhea and was vomiting blood, but her mouth and throat were so swollen that they couldn't pump her stomach. And this was even though a poison was already suspected. And they probably would have pumped her stomach, but they also weren't able to work in conjunction with St. James because they are at 2 different hospitals and probably are not aware of each other's case either. So instead, Mullins was given morphine and saline, and she remained stable until the next day when she rapidly deteriorated and fell into a coma.
Ugh.
Grant's condition had also suddenly worsened on April 27th, this is the next day, and she died at 7 a.m. Efforts were made to revive Mullins from her coma, but she died just hours later at 4:40 p.m.
Damn.
The day before, Ford was found lying on the floor at the office. After the women had probably left, he was pale and on the verge of passing out. So he was also admitted to the hospital and suffered blistering on his face, but other than that, he recovered.
No, because of course he did.
Of course he did. It's clear to police that this was some kind of poisoning situation, intentional or not, and they launched an investigation. Autopsies were conducted on the women, and Detective Superintendent Jameson was informed that cantharides were suspected because of the severe blistering of the women's mouths. He passed this information on to Ford during questioning, and Ford asked, "Why didn't someone tell me?" Which was a weird reaction.
A little bit.
Ford was asked to come from the hospital to the police station to give a statement, and he readily agreed. On the way there, he basically confessed his guilt, saying, "I am to blame. I do not know what made me do it." In his full statement, Ford explained that he knew of Spanish fly from his time overseas, but that he hadn't learned it was the same thing as cantharidin carried by the pharmacy that he worked in until about 3 weeks prior. I don't know what made him make the connection, but he'd seen cantharidin while stocking the warehouse, and at that point was like, oh, okay, it's the same thing. Then, on the morning of the poisonings, he'd been speaking with one of the actual chemists, Mr. Lushington, and he'd asked if they had any cantharidin. And he told the chemist that he had a neighbor who was breeding rabbits and had heard that sometimes it was given to rabbits to encourage them to breed, which was an actual use at the time.
I was going to ask, is that real, or is this like, it makes bunnies fuck?
I mean, it was actually more likely to kill the rabbits than multiply them.
Gotcha.
Lushington basically tells this to Ford. He shows him some bottles, and he says that the substance is extremely poisonous. And so at that point, Ford says, "In that case, I better not have it," and then he leaves the stockroom.
Okay.
Right, not everything makes sense still.
Yeah, the numbers are all there, but they're not adding up.
Yeah, so the police continue to question him. He continued to deny poisoning the women, but admitted that he had taken some of the Spanish fly from the storeroom purely out of curiosity.
Okay.
So the investigation had already uncovered a pair of scissors in the pharmacy with crystals on the tip, and more crystals were found scattered about the desk where the scissors were found. On the tip of the scissors, the crystals were identified as sugar, like the kind in coconut ice. And the crystals on the desk were found to be cantharidin. Chemical analysis was done on the vomit collected from both women at their respective hospitals, and they confirmed fatal doses of cantharidin in their systems. So they tell Ford that they know basically all of this.
Right.
And at this point, he decides to make a second statement.
He's like, "Oh, let me flip the script real quick.
Yeah,
hold on. See, what had happened was."
Yeah, what happened was he admitted to taking the Spanish fly once Lushington had left the stockroom. He poured some of it onto the desk and then used the scissors to push pieces of it into 2 of the coconut ice treats. It is possible that he never ate any of it, and the blistering on his mouth came from contact with his contaminated hands.
And that's why he didn't die.
Yes.
Okay.
When asked on the stand at the Old Bailey on May 18th why he did this, he admitted that he did it so he could give a piece to Grant because
we were very fond of each other, and she kept putting me off. And I made up my mind to give her cantharidin to stimulate her desire for me. It seemed to me that this was the best way to give it to her.
And when asked about Mullins, he said,
"I cannot say how Miss Mullins got the other piece, except that it must have been by accident. The only girl I was interested in was Miss Grant. I am deeply sorry I gave Betty Grant the drug. I now realize that I caused the death of these 2 girls in doing this crazy thing at the expense of losing my dear wife and children.
Mm-hmm.
Tragic.
Yeah.
Tragic, Ford.
Yeah.
Tragic.
So the jury was informed that anything more than 0.02 grains of cantharidin was a fatal dose. And this is roughly 1.3 milligrams, which is conservative, but given the anecdotal evidence at the top of the show, not outside of reason.
Mm-hmm.
Jurors were also informed that both women received 1 to 2 grains each.
Oh.
Or 65 to 130 milligrams, and stood no chance of recovering from that dose.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Not that there is any antidote for cantharidin exposure. Management is supportive and usually includes IV fluids to correct electrolyte and blood gas imbalances, and that's kind of all they can do. Like, if you survive the first couple of hours or couple of days, you can probably make it, but if you don't survive, you kind of just don't survive.
Yeah.
So Arthur Kendrick Ford knowingly gave a dangerous poison to at least one woman under the guise of an innocuous treat in the hopes that she would sleep with him, and unknowingly gave the same poison to another young woman carelessly, resulting in the deaths of both. He pled guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter, since despite his warning from Lushington, he had no intent to kill, and for his offense was sentenced in June of 1954 to 5 years imprisonment.
That's it?
For killing 2 women.
2 women?
Yeah.
Wow. Slap on the wrist. Gypsy Rose did more time.
I know. I know.
To be topical, she did more time than he did for killing 2 people.
Right?
Okay.
And this is where I think John Rowland has some good points. He ends his summary of the case by saying,
he shows the typical disregard of moral sense and common sense, which most poisoners appear to have. He was not a deliberate poisoner. He certainly did not intend to kill Miss Grant and Miss Mullins. We may be astonished, indeed, at the sheer carelessness which gave Miss Mullins a dose of the poison at all. Ford's wife has forgiven him. But if he had thought of his wife on that day in 1954, he would not have given the poison, and he would not have gone to prison.
Right? Yeah. So he's basically saying what we always say, like, you fucking bumbler, what were you thinking? Like, and why were you trying to screw around on your wife? Like,
right. And like, Mrs. Ford, why did you forgive him for killing 2 women and trying to fuck around on you?
I mean, what choice does she have? She has kids.
She has kids and it's 1954. She has no financial independence. I get it. Okay.
I know.
Fair enough.
But
fair
still.
enough. I forget. But still.
Yeah. Yeah.
But still.
Yeah. We can't say that Ford didn't know there was the intense possibility of poisoning with Spanish fly, but he also didn't see it as a poison. He saw it as a solution to a problem, bigger quotes, that he had. And he obviously came to see the manslaughter of 2 women as a crime, but Ford is probably a lot like other people in not seeing slipping someone a substance surreptitiously as being a crime.
Yeah. That's a crime.
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe it's just that, like, I was watching a movie where this was, like, happening as a gag, like somebody was being slipped something as I was, like, typing up this episode, but it's like, no matter what you're doing, if you give someone a drug or a poison and they don't know it, that's poisoning them.
Yeah.
Like, that's a crime.
It's a crime. Like, don't do that. It's consent. Consent is key.
Yes.
And they do not consent to that substance.
No.
Like,
yeah.
If you're being weird about it.
Yeah. Be honest.
Be
don't be a bumbler.
Yeah. Rule number 1.
Right. Spanish fly is banned in the US and most other countries except for that one dermatological solution that I said was approved. But there are multiple Google hits on Google Shopping for Spanish fly.
Oh.
And it's unlikely that these actually contain cantharidin now and are just combinations of random herbs. But people are still looking for and selling something that carries the aphrodisiac connotation. I mean, the website Hims, like that website for, like, if you're bald or if you have erectile dysfunction, that website, They have a page describing what Spanish fly is, just in case guys in 2024 are looking for it.
And did they do, so when they are describing it, are they saying this is a bad idea?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
okay,
They're
okay,
like, this
okay,
is a poison.
That's good. That's good. Okay.
I
I was like, I don't know, like, I don't know. I have to check, like,
no,
because
we
you
don't
never
need to
know.
drag hymns for anything like that.
Good job,
least.
hymns.
Yeah.
Good job.
As recently as 2017, a man was alleged to have dosed his female friend's drink with a substance sold as Spanish fly that he was told would make him have sex better. He was found not guilty of administering the substance to the friend because the jury believed him when he said it was a mistake. Their glasses got mixed up. The bartenders saw him adulterate one of the drinks and then stopped him from drinking it, but he said he wanted to take it for himself. So that's where that court case landed. And we can be upset, but he was not convicted of a crime. So I'm not saying that he did commit a crime. Bill Cosby infamously joked about Spanish fly at several points over his career. Here is a clip of an interview he did with Larry King while on a promo tour for his new book, and both men joke about it.
Spanish fly was the thing that all boys from age 11 on up to death, we will still be searching for Spanish fly.
That's right.
And what was the old story was, if you took a little drop, no, it was on the head of a pin.
That's right.
And
Drop
you put
it in
the drink.
Coca-Cola. Don't matter.
It doesn't make it, and the girl would drink it, and
she's yours.
Hello, America.
Yikes. Yikes on bikes.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't look good for him, certainly, when the sexual assault accusations came out circa 2015.
Mm-hmm.
But the judges determined in his cases that the Spanish fly jokes were inadmissible in court. They would only admit any comments he made about quaaludes, because that is what he allegedly used to sexually assault
Gotcha.
women. Yeah.
So they, okay.
And he did serve 3 years in prison for those sexual assaults. But he is getting sued again. So it's ongoing. Yeah.
Good.
And if you think that that's old news because it's 1991, you know, the cases are being discussed now, but that was a joke from 1991, not even admissible in court. Also consider that anytime you hear the song Brass Monkey by the Beastie Boys, you're getting another mention of Spanish fly.
Yes, you are right.
Yes, you are right. Lyrics, please.
Coolin' by the lockers, getting kind of funky. Me and the crew were drinking Brass Monkey. This girl walked by. She gave me the eye. I reached in the locker, grabbed a Spanish fly. I put it in the monkey, mixed it in a cup, went over to the girl. Yo, baby, what's up? I offered a sip. She gave me the lip. It did begin. The stuff wore in, and now she's on my tip. Yikes. Also, yikes. I love that song, too, and I didn't really, because it's kind of slaps, but I didn't,
Yeah,
okay.
It sucks. And, you know, it was released in 1987, but it still plays on the radio.
Literally heard it the other day.
Yeah. So I'm sure none of our wonderful, beautiful, smart listeners are going to be these kind of bumblers. I'm sure everyone on our fan base respects consent. And I'm not saying that you can't try to have a little bit of consensual fun on Valentine's Day or any other day. So, is there any legitimacy to substances that are purported to have aphrodisiac effects?
Hmm?
In short, the answer is yes.
Okay.
But there's no one single way that aphrodisiacs work. So the effect of a substance can be anything from increasing blood flow, like you mentioned, to inducing hormonal changes, to causing pleasurable hallucinations. It can be a number of things. Viagra, as you mentioned, causes an erection because it increases blood flow, but it doesn't cause a psychological effect that makes a partner seem more desirable. It just causes...
No, it's just purely physiological.
Purely physiological. The Cosmo article recommended maca, saying it is known as Peru's natural Viagra and is thought to increase energy, stamina, fertility, and libido. Parts of this have actually proven to be true in animal and human placebo studies, which indicated increased mating in animals and increased sexual desire in people who took 1.5 to 3 grams of the stuff. This increase in humans was likely an increase in overall energy, which contributed to increased sexual desire.
Yeah, I feel good.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not?
And a lot of the items on the Cosmo list have vitamins and amino acids that supposedly help you feel healthy and energetic, and this leads to increased stamina and libido.
Gotcha.
Studies of women who self-reported on their chocolate consumption and sexual function indicate some sort of relationship, but the actual aphrodisiac effects are debatable, and I would be curious to know if regular consumers would even feel a difference on the day-to-day. Like,
Right.
I love dark chocolate, but I don't think it necessarily makes me feel more energized or anything like that.
Right. I think that it's just one of those things where it just gives you the feel goods. And so you're like, I feel good. Why not feel better?
Right.
You know, it feels good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You're just increasing your pleasure. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And if
no, I'm all for that.
Yeah, if a square of chocolate helps you feel yourself,
feel yourself. Yeah.
Different compounds in chocolate could possibly be aphrodisiac, like phenylethylamine, which impacts serotonin and endorphin levels, and the N-acyl-ethanolamines, which have the potential to activate cannabinoid receptors and increase sensitivity to stimulus. And this brings us to the idea of chemsex, and that is that many people feel aphrodisiac effects of different drugs, such as cannabis, alcohol, and ecstasy, and so on and so forth. People have done drugs and had sex with every drug on the face of the earth, right? At least with sharing a bottle of wine, which is probably considered the most socially acceptable chemsex substance, there is a lowering of inhibition, which could make sexual desire easier to obtain. But I will be a wet blanket on this and say that too much alcohol, chronically or acutely, can make it difficult to perform. And it's not really a good idea to engage in any kind of sexual act when you're too inebriated to give consent. That goes for any drug taken by any person in whatever relationship situation you're in.
Preach on it.
And so that's it. That's all I really had to say about Spanish fly and aphrodisiacs.
I had no idea, because I literally saw that stuff at gas stations when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So, I just wonder, were the doses in the gas station really, really, really small doses?
It was probably not cantharidin by that point.
It probably wasn't.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that by at least the late 80s, they were already starting to really work on banning it in the US and other countries.
Okay.
So it was probably
because I was like, that's crazy that there's just poison at the gas station,
right.
sitting right there. I mean, which there are poisons in the gas station.
Yes, there still are. You shouldn't do herbs from the gas station.
Or head shops. Be careful out there. We've already talked about spice, or we've already talked.
Yeah. So you were probably looking at an herbal mix. And,
okay.
Yeah. But still, it had that connotation,
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
Yep. So
interesting.
Happy Valentine's, everyone.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Feel love wherever you feel it, and stay safe.
Stay safe. Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please follow, subscribe, and review us everywhere you get your podcasts.
For more Lethal Dose content, you can find us at Lethal Dose Pod on Instagram, Tumblr, and TikTok.
For an overdose of content, subscribe on Patreon for exclusive episodes and much more.
The show theme is Look Far by our dear wizard friend Fogweaver. More of their music can be found on bandcamp.com.
Lethal Dose is created, researched, produced, and edited by Kayla Woods and Bina Steineko. Stay safe, and remember,
the dose makes the poison.